And once again, thank you for stopping by GardenStateWeather.com and GardenStateWeather.blogspot.com, providing superior forecasting for the northern mid-Atlantic region 24 hours a day. I'm forecaster Robert Smith. This is the extended video forecast discussion part 3 for the northern mid-Atlantic region. This is where we're going to get into the models and see if they can handle the situation that's going on in the oceans and the stratosphere and put everything together here. We'll start by a recap of the Arctic ice oscillation for the GFS model, the GFS ensembles, and the Canadian ensemble models too. It shows the Arctic ice oscillation in a positive state through the beginning of January, and it continues in a positive state through the middle of January as well. That's not a good news. And the North Atlantic ice oscillation from the GFS, the European model, the European ensemble, the GFS ensemble, and the Canadian ensemble shows a positive state here with neutral variability here towards slightly negative here. This would be for the Canadian ensemble NAO, but everybody is basically showing a positive state here. Now again, not a good signal if you want snowstorms in the northern mid-Atlantic, because you're going to see isentropic lifting storms, and some of the air will be cold enough to support snow and mixed precipitation in the air. But if you really want to see a blockbuster snowstorm, you're not going to really see it under this kind of configuration. And again, this is not just the GFS. This is the European ensemble, the GFS ensemble, and the Canadian GEM ensemble. They're all showing the same kind of thing. We would also like to see negative NAO or negative NAO in a west-based fashion from the GFS, the European ensemble, the GFS ensemble, and the Canadian ensemble, all showing a positive state here, basically a positive state. There's one model here. Again, this is the European West NAO model showing a tanking at the beginning of January. This would probably be indicative of a snowstorm or some kind of a wintry precipitation event, which we covered in the daily video forecast discussion this morning. The Eastern Pacific oscillation, we want it to be negative, but we don't want it to be this negative as we are right now. Again, the GFS, the European ensemble, the GFS ensemble, and the Canadian ensemble all showing this to be driving to weakening, actually, but still in a negative phase. This is a good phase as the jet couplet out over the Pacific begins to slow up, and that's what we need to see. This is one portion of the forecast that needs to change, and it looks like the modeling, including the ensemble packages, are showing this to some degree. Pacific North America ice oscillation, GFS, European ensemble, GFS ensemble, Canadian ensemble. We're in the positive to negative phase here, going further down into the tank and then coming back up again. Still, most of the modeling showing neutral to below average negative PNA. Again, that's not a good sign for East Coast snowstorms. Stratospheric diagnostics from the European model as of December 28th, which is always a day behind in lag of data. It shows the polar vortex currently over the pole and warming continuing into western North America and out into the Pacific Ocean here, and we'll monitor this. Once again, the European model at 70 millibars is showing this split here with one center over Russia, the other center hedging into North America. So we're definitely heading into a colder pattern, and the warming continues in the Pacific and east of and west of Japan here. This means that we're going to see definite changes here across the northern reaches of North America. We already have a stratospheric warming event, which is showing up on the model data across south of the Aleutian Islands into northwestern portions and northwestern territories of Canada, so that we know that this is going to push part of the polar vortex to split in two. It's been showing this for quite a while now, but how much of an impact this has versus the EPO and getting everything together here in the storm formation on the East Coast, that remains in question. And here we are with the GFS model at 70 millibars here in the stratosphere, the upper reaches, not really the upper reaches, but the middle to the upper reaches of the stratosphere. Here's our polar vortex locked up over the circle. Here is our warming, which continues over portions of the Pacific, specifically the western and northern Pacific over the other side of the pole, and to the western areas of the Pacific. North of the Aleutian Islands, we find a ridge trying to build up in the stratosphere. And if we move this forward in time, find a split where the warming continues here, and this would be for around the second or so of the month of January into the new year. A split, one center moving over to the other side of the pole, and then our other lobe here over Hudson's Bay, Canada. Move this further down the line, and we can see the evolution here that it means a cold pattern will be coming in place according to the GFS model, and then eventually what it shows is in this feature here, by around the 6th or so, or the 7th, everything begins to culminate and then move back up towards the poles once again. There's still a significant amount of warming occurring in the upper middle reaches of the stratosphere. That means a trough access at the surface and lower layers of the troposphere right over the eastern seaboard. And this looks like it's going to continue. So we could be in for some very cold weather during the month of January. But whether or not this is going to be an active pattern or not depends on how the EPO plays out and how much of the subtropical branch gets involved with the Arctic and polar stream. Now, when we look at the GFS, which is the 500 millibar forecast here, going forward over the next 16 days, we start out with Hudson's Bay Low. We start out with a building positive PNA here, but there's trouble here still with the EPO in the Pacific and the strong jet couplet. Now, by the time we get into early January, we can see that temperatures are going to start falling, and we know that by the 2nd, and then even further as we get into the month of January. By the time we get to around, let's say the 4th, 5th, or 6th or so, the polar vortex or the Hudson's Bay vortex will shift to the south, but unfortunately, at the same time, what we're having going on here is the Sargasso Sea ridge having a large influence on the Atlantic coastal plain here. Pacific jet is still well too strong with way too many disturbances in the northern flow, and it's buckling, but it's still a progressive flow. The jet stream in the PNA area is too strong, the EPO is too strong still, and a split flow pattern, and the polar vortex drops south for a while and then lifts back north once again. And well, let's face it, the GFS is a little bit clueless here, and even the GFS, this is the operational GFS. The GFS parallel model, the upgrade, which is coming, is not that much different than what we're seeing here. And when we look at the GFS, basically the ensemble of the 500 millibar height anomalies, actually, in decameters here, start off with cold air coming in. There's no question about it, but the brunt of the cold air is still locked up in Canada. Here is our positive PNA, which is trying to form. Here's the split in the jet as pronounced, and this is a problem going forward because even though the polar vortex, or part of the Hudson's Bay Low, if you want to call it that, just dropped south into northern New England, under this split flow we have forming positive PNA under the stratospheric warming that's occurring here in this region here. And then we still have the undercutting of these lows in the subtropical jet. So it's split flow pattern, but look what happens. Even though the lobes of this move through the region for the first part of the year, we get into another pattern reload where everything begins to change. The Pacific begins to change again, especially the eastern Pacific, and ridge access at 500 millibars. It looks like it's good for a snowstorm probably around the 7th here, because that's where we'd like to see a 500 millibar height anomalies here across the Dakotas and down through the southwestern United States with a trough access in the east. And anything cutting under this would probably bring some kind of a snow event or a winter precipitation event, but that lifts out, and it looks like everything just becomes a little bit more convoluted. We still have large ridging here, but still a very active Pacific jet here flooding the eastern United States. Cold air into the eastern United States by the time we get to the 12th and 13th and 14th, and that waxes and wanes of very cold air. I'm not saying we're not going to have precipitation events, but these is not going to be the kind of situation where we're going to see strong coastal storms here. These are going to be isentropic lifting events where they get involved with both the polar, the Arctic stream, cross-polar flow, and subtropical jet. Doesn't look like anything is really locking in. The pattern seems to want to reload by the time we get to middle January again. And as we get to the middle part of January and day 16, we have our positive PNA forming again off the eastern United States. It's still a couplet here in the Pacific here that doesn't look quite right, and very, very warm and mild anomalies here over the eastern United States. So this is a very, and it's still blocking here just a little bit too far to the north and east. So it doesn't look like we're locking in here on anything just yet. European model guidance, not that much better. Still, polar vortex or Hudson's Bay vortex comes south and then north again. Lots of deviation here in the forecast. This is a very convoluted situation. The models are not handling any of this at all very well. By the 7th, again, Wednesday around my birthday time, polar vortex or Hudson's Bay vortex, very extremely cold heights and cold air into the eastern United States at 500 millibars. Ridge building in. This looks good. This looks good for a precipitation event, snowstorm, or at least snow around here on that Wednesday and Thursday here, the first week of January, and then that lifts further into the Atlantic Canada, northeastern Atlantic. The ridge axis becomes a little bit more diffuse through the Central Plains, and still a very active and unsettled pattern in the eastern Pacific. So I don't think the models are handling this very well. They're probably not going to going into the future either. NOAA's CFS model version 2, seasonal climate forecast model here, 500 millibar anomalies here in the height falls here. Go towards our region here. We're in a confluent flow here right now, and then we're hedging in towards a colder period here where the air mass begins to cool. Arctic air begins to spill into southeastern Canada, into the North Americas here. But the CFC, or CFS model rather, by the time we get to, 360 hours, the 12th of January here, warmth continues in the anomalies here. This is from this morning's run. Then additional warming just floods the eastern United States and then continues to back westbound as we head into the last part of the month. So the CFC model, whether it's useful or not, is not showing the kind of thing that the other models are showing, and there's quite a lot of volatility and variability going forward. So what we walk away with tonight and through the extended period is that there's a lot of convolution in the models, and they're not going to be able to handle the changes that are ongoing from multiple complexes here. We've got the stratospheric warming going on. We've got the EPO in the tank hedging up towards neutral territory. We've got storm potentials here. There's no question about it. But the storm potentials don't look like major nor'easters at this point. They just look like major, winter storms with isentropic lift events occurring across the region. We're going to continue to monitor the situation. This is a very convoluted winter. It's not like anything we've seen over the past couple of winters, and there's a lot of players on the field here that are in disagreement with one another, and the models are certainly not at this point being able to handle the ingestion of all of this information and get the forecast right. So, the models haven't been doing well past a couple of days, so we can't expect that to continue because we know that that will be unlikely. So we'll continue to monitor the forecast for you and everybody else at GardenStateWeather.com, GardenStateWeather.blogspot.com, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+. I'm forecaster Robert Smith. Thanks for joining.